Hello and welcome to Get Lost with a Travel Guide with your host Ben. Today we've got a friend of mine, we've known each other for a couple of years now, is based out in Adelaide and love to talk about Adelaide by a gentleman called Mark. You might have see if I got the last name correct, Coolmartry, if that's right.
That's right, Coventry.
Beautiful. Mark is, being an Adelaide local. Mark also runs his own tours called Cool Tours. And in addition to that, I think so I do definitely know you have an Indigenous background, but are you Aboriginal Elder? Is that correct?
Yes, so I am, definitely so.
Can you share a bit of light on that? Because some people don't even know what an Aboriginal Elder is.
I suppose one of the things about eldership is more than just age. It's about wisdom and knowledge and that ability to share that information. So it's not only knowing country, it's about having that ability to share it. And I think that's where eldership comes from. It's more so than just an age factor, that you get to a certain age level and all of a sudden you're classed as an elder.
What do you mean by that, like of country?
Well, it's about understanding all the sacred sites. It's about understanding the environment and in understanding all of our history of our people and understanding in the ability to be able to share that. And in my case, in a tourism product.
That's one of the reasons why I love tourism. Like for me, I always find that there's how do you actually share it and make it viable? And tourism, I mean, not really during COVID, but it's this vehicle that we can really show people. I really found. Is that what you're doing?
That's exactly it. So,
Beautiful.
and what's happened is during COVID, it's probably actually been a good thing for my business because it's enabled me to go back and think hard about what I'm delivering. But what it's also done is within our state here, we've had the ability to have a great state vouchers. So many people who don't normally look within our state has been able to use $100 voucher and come and do a tour or an experience. And so I've been really pleased to get a whole lot of experiences, especially for university students who quite often cannot afford to do a tour. They've been able to come on, technically a free tour that's been sponsored by the South Australian government. So that's been really good for my business.
Is there any people like sort of interstate? Well, once again, come on, need borders opening once again. But like, have you taken more like international people around? Are they the type of people that are normally interested, or you actually got some local Aussies trying to actually understand what's in their own backyard?
Yeah, well, that's what's happened. I started to get a couple of interstate people towards the end of 2020. However, 2021, there's been none. There's been no internationals. It's just been the South Australian market. So uh, obviously, like many other operators, I cannot wait for the borders to open, especially the international market to come back.
Well, I mean, for myself, like I started being a travel guide around Australia in 2017. And when I come to Adelaide, met yourself and you shared a lot of stories and information. And me, I thought I was a pretty well-traveled guy. And then I'm like, hang on, there's so much about Australia I don't even know. And especially when you go to the outback and remote parts of South Australia. Like, what are some like common questions that people ask you where you're like, yeah, right, like people don't know what they don't know. Like, what's some info that you might be able to typically share?
I suppose one of the things is about the rights and freedoms of our people that were taken away. And so there were policies and procedures put in place that stopped our people growing as a people. Our language was taken away, our right to culture was taken away. And so we've just had to try to revive and to survive. So a lot of the things go on today, even with our own people, is around learning and relearning. So quite often there's a group of people who have forgotten about different stories that have been passed on. And it's because we come from an old tradition, that's where the stories are passed on. And so one of the things, a good thing that has happened is the ministries, that those missionaries that have come in and they've documented while all of these rights and freedoms were taken away from our people, the missionaries documented language, culture, history. So now we're able to go back and a lot of relearning and a lot of whole complete new learning that the information has come from many of our ancestors, but lots of information we haven't known. What amazes people is the sights. So within country or within the environment, you quite often may see different features of an animal or of a landmark that looks like. So I do a lot of tours in the Fleurieu Peninsula, and there's a whale in the water, there's seals in another part in the rocks, there is a wild dog out in the water, and you see all of this in the landform. And that's what amazes people, because unless you look, you don't see.
So you really basically interpret and decipher like tradition, like storytelling, what was told, what was like gone, then sort of being documented by the missionaries, and now you're sort of reviving that in today's society.
Yeah, and so a lot of things have been kept and passed on to me, but there are many things that we are putting together, and especially some of our dreaming stories that go right across many, many kilometres that connects up a lot of people. So we have something called storylines and songlines. So the stories may connect through a whole lot of other groups of people. And now we're learning a lot more broader. So we're learning the stories of other groups of people. And then we're able to share our part of that story. And other people will...
Sorry,
yeah.
Continue. Sorry, I'm getting a bit excited.
So other people will tell... I know many people have got a lot of questions, Ben, and I don't mind you asking. It's good, because this is what this is about.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
other groups of people will share what's happening in their area. And then I'm able to share what's happened and what's happening in my area.
So storytelling, song lines. So if I were to meet someone and say, hey, I got a song line, they'd probably think I'm going to pick up a guitar and sing them a tune. Like, yeah, what is the song line? What is
so
that?
So a song line is a song that might be sung to keep people together, and an understanding or a storyline. There are things like the Seven Sisters is one common story. However, that same story might go across many, many nations. So within Australia, many people don't understand, but we'd have about 300 different groups of people with about 300 different languages. So unlike New Zealand, where they can able to speak Maori, in Australia, if we looked at speaking one language, like which one do you choose out of the 300? We can't do that. So it's very much like Europe. If you look there's Italy and France and Germany and Great Britain. So within Australia, it's an easy way to explain. There were so many groups of people like that whose own individual culture, that, you know, the Italian culture, the German culture, the French culture are all beautiful. And so within Australia, we have a very similar, except it's a larger scale.
I get you. I think that's probably a common misconception as well. Like, you're all Aboriginal people. It'd be like in Europe, they go, oh, you're European. And if you say something like that to Europe, then they're French. Like, I'm not European, I'm French. No, I'm not European, I'm German. Oh, I'm so it's like, oh, you're Aboriginal's like, well, hang on a minute. It's like, so is that kind of sort of same similarity?
That's exactly it, Ben. You've got it right in one there. And I suppose that's the easiest thing people understand if you look at Europe, whereby there's a whole lot of different groups of people that make up the whole. It's like what we call Australia. There's a whole lot of different groups of people that make up the whole. And so with the storylines and song lines, it's about a connection. So like things just didn't happen in one area. Say, for example, the Seven Sisters, it goes over a number of groups of people. And so we have a common link in 5 or 6 or 8 of those different tribes or groups of people.
What would involve in the storyline, in the storytelling, in the song lines? What are they?
Well, it is about a connecting up of a story. It's a connecting up of a common link that so we didn't just live in isolation, obviously. So it's like we have our state borders. So there is a something that connects up or divides one group from another. Quite often it might be a waterway. It could be a sacred mountain that on one side of the mountain is one group of people, on the other is another group of people. But there's a common story and a common link, that the formation of that mountain or the formation of a river. And so that's the sort of things that link us up together. So that story of how a river was created.
When is a story told? When is a songline told?
Originally what happened is they were told in ceremony. And if you look at our own schooling system, so we may begin school at kindergarten, then we'll go into reception and year one up through the primary school years, then into the high school years. And it's very much what happened, where our learning was layer upon layer upon layer. So by the time we got to sort of that equivalent of a PhD or even a university level, we had so much knowledge and understanding of creation and understanding of the land. And in our cases, we live on the waters. So the land, the waters, the cosmology. So every time we had ceremony, or maybe every year or on a 6-month interval, we learnt a little bit more. So it is exactly like the schooling system, where you begin using the basics of ABC 1, 2, 3, but as you go through, you learn more and more till you get up to the higher level and then onto university. And that's very much what happened. But through the rights and freedoms that were taken away from our people through policies like the stolen generation, through policies about assimilation, about segregation, all of those things that have happened to our people have stopped our learning. So we may have only got to a primary school learning whereby, you know, that's all we were allowed to learn about our own culture and history. But all of those other in-depth stories, the in-depth oral traditions were taken away from us. So now today, we have to go back and thankfully to those missionaries, thank for those anthropologists that documented a lot of information. We then can go back and relearn and learn about the information from as if we were in ceremony.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like, I mean, it could be dedicated so much time and energy if everyone focused on it. It's never going to be 100% theoretically back to that strong tradition where it's at now. It's going to reach this sort of new level of like, well, where's it going to be at? What's some like really positive, interesting, both actually, like that was lost that you found? You're like, wow, like this is something that, you know, Aussies or the world can really learn from. Was there any sort of standout teachings?
One thing happened over this COVID period is I met a landholder who just asked a simple question of me of who are the traditional owners of this farm that I own, and because I'd like to pay homage to them. So we sat down over a cup of tea and I started throwing a couple of things who it possibly could be. And then in the end, we, with a common person that we knew, a mutual acquaintance, we were able to find out through research he did in the 1980s that this land that the landholder had was belonging to a group of people that hadn't been spoken about for 150 years. And so, and I was a part of that group and didn't even know it. And so through research and a grant we got from the state government, we're able to do a little bit of research and come up with the values of the plants that our people use for food and medicines, and how we interacted with the swamp area. So we came up with all this information just because somebody sat down and asked a question. And that question, what John, the landholder, had asked me was who were the traditional owners. So by sitting down talking, a whole lot come that we never expected. We certainly did not expect to find a lost tribe that hadn't been talked about for 150 years. But what happened is those people were removed from their land and they were moved onto a mission. And so because farming and townships were happening, then so we were able to go back and trace where these people went and what happened. And then we're able to go back and learn that, you know, that this area is a very wet and cold area. So during winter, they weren't there. However, they moved to other places. So it's thankfully, like I said, those research that the missionaries and anthropologists put down were able to backtrack and find information. So that is something fascinating. And so I'm able to run a tour at that property. And the person, what he's done is, he calls it a farm, but it's actually a nature conservancy. So what he's done is he's rewilding that area, and he's taking, there's no cattle on that area, there's no sheep, there's no crops. What he's done is he's bringing back to the natural environment. So within there, and we're finding that a lot of species, plants, animals are returning to that area. And it's a pilot study it began at, but it's created a movement of what's going on in other places and what could they potentially do to bring back rare species of plants and animals.
That's interesting. Is that what you can find on your tours? Like, suppose a passenger, what I'm saying, a tourist, anyone flies into Adelaide, is that right?
Yes.
And then,
so if they come into Adelaide, there is certainly an option where they can go to this place where we've done this learning. And, you know, we're a long way off. We're probably, you know, over the next 3 to 5 years, you know, that'll enable us to regrow a lot of plants. So we started already at this property. So Aboriginal people have been involved in it, and our people, the Waki is what they're called. So the Waki people have been involved. However, right now what's happening is we're growing more things. And by growing some of these plants, it's attracting some of the animals that were there previously. So we're seeing now different mammals coming back, different butterflies, different frogs. A whole lot of species are returning or coming out of nowhere that weren't there. And then they're finding that there are there's so much biodiversity going on there. And so it's an exciting thing to be a part of.
Are you going to try and bring back any sort of ceremony or culture in that direction on the property?
So what I do is when people come on that tour with me, I do a smoking ceremony explaining the property, explaining about the site, because there's a large mountain right there.
Sorry, can I ask a question there? I thought about 500 questions, sorry. Like the basics of, you know, someone living in Sydney, what is a smoking ceremony? People probably not even sure what that is.
So a smoking ceremony is a blessing. So what would have happened originally is someone who was coming into an area and say on the opposite side of the mountain, they may light a fire and say that they're there and they wish to come into someone else's area. So somebody would have walked up to that mountain, went to see what they wanted because it was a common ground, and talked it through. When they came in then, it was then a blessing, because sometimes we go into an area and we may bring in bad feelings or bad vibes. And so the ceremony is just to smoke people as a blessing. We use a product called Coastal Rosemary, and other groups of people may use gum leaves. Other groups, like the Native American Indians, use sage. And it is just a cleansing. It is a blessing to welcome people and to ensure they feel good about being there. And the people whose land that is, that they feel that they can offer a blessing over to somebody else.
What is it about the smoke, do you think, that allows that positivity to prosper?
It's a cleansing. It's a breaking down of a barrier that may be existing there. So when somebody first comes there, they may be apprehensive. However, what the smoke does, it welcomes and it embraces people. And if it's done correctly, it just allows people to be relaxed. And so the product we use that comes from the local environment is it's a really good smelling product, but it has the effect, like people use lavender, is the easiest way of explaining it, just as a calming agent. And so what we do, we use these products so that it calms people down and they feel immersed in country or feel immersed in the environment.
That's interesting. Like, okay, so if I'm in a bad mood, right? If I'm in a, sometimes I write things down and it's in my mind and I'll get it down on a pen and paper. Now, I've also, if you believe in energy and you can release energy, and there's even this, it's like a therapy sort of process. When you write down and you burn it, it's sort of like you're releasing it, you're letting it go. I wonder if there's somehow like a similarity into the science behind it. Like, as you said, if
There's,
you're going on to country and you want to, because bring positivity will release the negativity perhaps into a flame.
yeah, so what we do is during the smoking ceremony, we have a message stick or a talking stick. And within the group, one person talks at a time. And we ask them to either verbally say or in their mind, just to release anything that they're feeling and release it to the environment. And so that it's as a cleansing and let the wind take it away so that their fears, their cares, even what they enjoy and they're proud of, let that all go. Let it all, that the ability to be able to do that. And you're right. So sometimes people will write things down and burn it and let that disappear that way. But the smoking ceremony does the same thing, whereby you're releasing all your problems. We have something in our stomach region that we call our miwi. And the miwi is far more than just a gut feeling. It's about an understanding. It's a connection to country that started through the womb. And it is that releasing, and it is the ability to be able to know what's happening before it even happens. So it's about a freeing up of that environment and freeing up of our intuition. And one way we call it is miwi kungalin. And kungan means to listen. So it's about listening to our inner self. And so when we're doing that ceremony, and I do this with every single group, we do a smoking ceremony and allow miwi kungalin to happen so that each individual person can talk about their fears, their concerns, and just to share in a positive way, and let any fears go in the wind. And the smoke takes that away. And so what that actually does is then people can either do it in silence, and even if someone is doing things in silence, the next person has to wait, and every single person has to wait till that person hands a stick over, and no one is allowed to speak or do anything. It is just about one person. And then at the end of all the smoke ceremony, what I do is I bury that on country. And so I begin with a welcome to country, but then just like each and every person took something out of the smoke took something out of every person. And then we bury it so that each person within that circle, that yarning circle, then has that ability to know that they belong to country. Because I talk about this in every one of my tours. We live in a very diverse country of Australia. We live with many, many groups of people. And so it is a multicultural country we live in. And whilst I do welcome to country and I welcome them, I let people know that because of that ceremony, they are now very much a part of the area. And so what I also do is when every tour I do there, 10% of everyone who pays goes back into that environment. So whether or not it is $10 that every person is contributing out of their tour fee, that will create the planting of something, or the doing work on those waterways. So whatever we do, every single person then not only belongs to country through that ceremony, through the tour, that the fee that they pay, that it's actually a contribution going back into fixing that land.
Mm. Is this information, it's deemed rather sacred, but is it allowed to be sharing this knowledge openly to anyone who wants to learn it? Or is it sort of like knowledge to me, you know, if I go to work or if I've got a, you know, if I've got a, I'm trying to climb the corporate ladder, you know, and I've got a manager who's got way more knowledge than I, and I ask them for advice, they're not always necessarily going to give it to you. You got to earn that. I always think like, no matter where you are, like you go up to anyone, hey, teach me how to do it. It's like, why should I pass you on this knowledge? Like, is that the case with Aboriginal culture? Is that kind of like what you can offer on your tours, or is like, well, this is knowledge, kind of like going to school and I can just teach everyone? Is it sort of?
Yeah, so there is like a basic curriculum, if you look at it that way, like the school curriculum. So we don't give over everything. So some of it is secret women's business that only women can do. And you have to earn the right to be able to have that knowledge. And the same with, say, a group of men. You have to earn that right, and you don't get it all in one go, because it's like using any implement from a knife to, you know, you got to know how to learn that. So you might start off by using a butter knife or even, you know, something else, but you learn stages by stages of knowing how to use that implement. And you can't just give over. So what I do a very generic brand. However, I touch on things that many other operators don't. And just because I welcome them to country, it doesn't mean then people can automatically go and do welcomes to countries. Just because someone may have learnt the language, it doesn't give them the right unless they belong to that area. And so I talk about all those things as well. So it's not about people taking corporate knowledge from me and using it however they like. They can't do that. And I explain that about what they can. I just want to let people know that they are very much a part of that environment. So they are a part of the work that we're doing to bring back, to learn and relearn history and culture, and to strengthen what's already there. So some of it is that relearning, some of it is been passed on through oral traditions. And so some of it is a contemporary learning. And it is about learning all of these places and learning that information, that just because we tell people a story of an area, that they not necessarily have a right to then go and multiply that and tell their story that as if it's their story. The story belongs to our people. And although we are welcoming and embracing other people learning our knowledge, they don't have a right to then call it their story.
Kind of like this podcast.
No, but this is what it's about, Ben. So I was really happy when you contacted me about coming on this podcast. So if there's anything I can teach people, because then what happens, people teach me. There's a two-way learning in everything that we do. And as long as we're all open to learning and sharing, I think we can create a better environment. And so I've done many things across my life. And so I've found that tourism is the model now that allows me to put all of those teachings and learnings I've had into a model that's able to be shared. And then we can come back and you know, some of the people I've met on some of the tours come back and allow me to learn more from them as well. So there's a whole lot of people, and you know this yourself, that when people come on a tour, we don't know who's coming along and the knowledge that they can also teach us. And so I'm open to learning far more. It's like, you know, today carbon farming, or, you know, looking at carbon offsets, or looking at scientific views that we may not be aware of. It's about teaching and learning from everyone.
Yeah, 100% agree. From memory, I'm pretty sure on your tours, you've got some like local foods, or like you're growing certain flavors. Is that right?
Yes. So there are local foods. So what we're doing is growing more.
When you say growing, like for me, I mean, I've had international tourists for a long time, and a really popular thing on trips is food, is cuisine. People want to try the local delicacies. and go, oh, what's Australian food? I'm like, we don't really have much. You know, we basically copied every, you know, what Vegemite to Lamingtons to like desserts to, you know, certain spreads that's been invented here. Maybe the pavlova, you know, where you look at other. I think, well, true Australian food is probably Indigenous food. You know, if you cook up a goanna or something like that, that's as Australian for me as it probably gets. But what I didn't realize, because I'm like terrible with plant knowledge and herbs, like I'm like the world's worst cook. But there's a lot of herbs you can find, I think, uniquely in Australia. Is that right? Is that what you're kind of propagating, bro?
And that's exactly it. So and you're right, we've got to propagate this. So this is what I try to do, and work with the friends of groups where I do tours. And so try to get more plants put in, because the more that can be planted can only help my tours. And so, and that's why also then when I do a tour, I put a little bit money back in either the property or hand over to, say, the friends of an area called Rattalung that I do a tour on, whereby they can then look after that area and put more plants in. And the more plant knowledge that can be shared, that when people come, they can see all the different plants and foods and medicines and how we use the values of these areas. And then what I also do is then introduce some foods that may come from elsewhere to give people a taste. And so today we can get, you know, the Kakadu plum. We can get a whole lot of other ranges of foods like that. And if people wish to taste kangaroo or some different foods like that, we can get that in today. So we're not necessarily going to harvest a kangaroo on the spot for people to see. However, within a meal, we can have those sort of foods if people wish. Or they can just have a natural plant-based food, a meal.
What is that? Like, it might be hard for people to find this. Like, for example, if people want to grow bananas, apples, they grow in large quantities, and certain fruits can ripen and produce multiple in a season. Like, but I'm pretty sure, like, sort of indigenous to Australia plants, don't they take ages to grow because it's different growing conditions? Is it really harder to grow? To be able to maintain it?
Many things grow only in a certain area. So lots of nurseries who specialize in native plants, that they will know whether or not something will grow in your area. And I think that's important, is just to play around and to have a look what grows in your garden. And it might be a little bit. So what I encourage people to do is, instead of harvesting in the wild, go to a nursery, grow a few different things, and get together with some of your neighbours, either within your suburb or in different suburbs, and create a feast of what's growing in your area, and then create a meal and share that meal, and just have a good time in enjoying the foods of Australia.
Spot on. Well, I'm just going to ask a couple more questions and we'll be able to wrap it up, if that's all right, Mark.
Sure.
All right. So, just want to have a bit of fun as well. On your trips, I mean, we've deep dived into some pretty interesting topics, I believe, but just for some fun sort of things as well. Would you be able to tell me perhaps what your most embarrassing moment has occurred on one of your trips? Something funny, just bizarre that happened?
One of the things we do with our meals is I bring the food and it's all packaged up. And then I like to give people a cup of tea or a coffee. Well, last week I went, where did I put that milk? And I remembered that I took it out of the fridge and I put it on the table and didn't grab it. So that was one of the things, just forgetting products. Just, you know, I've got to go through, yep, tick, got that, got this, to make sure, because I do it on the land, I've got to make sure I cart everything with me so that I don't forget. So I've got all my meals, you know, and yeah, so like you've just got to tick off everything to make sure I've got the smoking bush. I've got my first aid kits. It's just all sorts of things you've got to make sure you've got, because the way our tours are. It's not that we're sitting in a building. We're actually out there walking through the environment. So you got to make sure you take everything. So the next time, I guarantee I'll make sure I've got milk.
Nice one, Mark. Well, yeah, mate, really appreciate all your thoughts, all your insight, and all your information that you're able to share. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to. I mean, whereabouts is it? I mean, you fly into Adelaide, and to find whereabouts your trips are. Obviously, it's not in the city; it's a little bit out somewhere, I think.
Yeah. So I do most of my work through the Fleurieu Peninsula. Many people could find Victor Harbour, which coincidentally, very soon, there's a new causeway being built from what's the Victor Harbour mainland across to Granite Island. And it will be the largest piece of Aboriginal artwork in Australia. It'll be just over 600 metres, and it tells two dreaming stories that people can see by looking at the land. And so it's in those sort of areas that there's also a lot of work being done on what's called the Wild South Coast, which is the Hyson Trail. And then we're hoping that dreaming story that is being told, because that where it concludes is on Kangaroo Island. So there's a whole host of things that people can see by coming on a cool tour. They'll see the land, the waters, the creation stories, and then they'll end up on Kangaroo Island, whereby they will see the resting place of our spirit ancestor Ngurunderi. So there's a whole connection to country that we want to be able to show people and share with as many people as possible. So, look me up. It's Cool Tours. We've
Cool
got a
with
website.
A K, I think it's
Cool with a K.
www.cooltours.com.au. Is that right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And so that's where you'll find me. And we look forward to when the borders open up. We welcome back all Australians. And then when the international borders come back, we're hoping that we get a lot of international guests to come and get an authentic experience with a group, because all of the people who work for me are all Aboriginal. They all belong to the country. They all know the stories. And we look forward to presenting and showing country from our Ngarrindjeri point of view.
That's awesome. For anyone who might be listening out there, a great starting point. Yeah, flying to Adelaide, and then just to get the ball rolling, I think it's on the North Terrace. You've got the South Australian Museum, and it has the world's largest Indigenous artifacts in the world.
That's right. So in the South Australian Museum on North Terrace is the largest display of Aboriginal culture in the world. So just by going in there is a starting point. And then there's, just around on Grenfell Street is Tandanya, a large Aboriginal art gallery. So that there are a multitude of places that people can get to without even having a car. So you can get into Adelaide and walk around in our city. And there's so much other history and culture in our city. I do a lot of work with the South Australian Heritage Council. So there's built environment, there's the maritime. So there's all of these different forms of heritage that you don't even have to have a car. You can just walk around our city. So it's a very unique city.
Actually, before we do wrap it up, can I ask you about that? You said you're working for the government or for the council, how does that work?
Yeah, I'm chairperson of the State Aboriginal Committee on Heritage, and Keith Conlon, who is famous in South Australia for a show he used to do called Postcards, is the chairperson of the South Australian Heritage Council that looks at built heritage, maritime heritage. And then we got together in a discussion and said, well, how do we look at just heritage in general? And because our state has got so much to offer. And so there wasn't actually a heritage tourism strategy that was launched last year, or rather this year, late this year, to look at heritage in our state and to provide so much information that we're across everything. So heritage is heritage in our mind. And if we can share Aboriginal heritage, and if others can share the built heritage, the maritime heritage, the rail heritage, it can only build for a better place in South Australia.
I like what you're about, Mark. I think personally, I think your heart and the mind is on the right place. Where Australia or South Australia or Adelaide will be in 5, 10, 20 years. I think I don't know exactly where. We don't have a crystal ball, but I like the direction everything's moving and everything that you're doing. I think it's just going to bring some positive steps forward. So I'm a big fan of what you're doing, mate. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you so much. I look forward to the next time you're here with a group of people and I can show you around, just show you some of my local Aboriginal knowledge and share that with all consumers.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Mark. Until next time. And hopefully, the borders open up soon, mate. Can't wait.
No problem. All right. See you, mate.
Any